Oi oi, it's your boy, the Bobby Green of mean Keith Jardine, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you on Monday the 14th of February. Happy Valentine's Day. Have a smooch. Today we're talking about UFC 271, which took place over the weekend, Robert Whittaker versus Israel Adesanya 2, and other fights that appeared on that card. There were some actual bangers. There was also a couple of just dog shit fights, but the bangers we'll talk about and the dog shit fights we'll laugh about. But why bury the lead? Let's get into it with the Whittaker versus Adesanya fight. This was quite gratifying for me because my pre-fight analysis, which I put some of in the preview for the Boycast, but the rest of it was in the Boycast, I was just talking about things that Rob Whittaker could do differently, because I've maintained that the first fight was very bad tactical work from Robert Whittaker. And it's been bizarre because there were so many people coming into this fight going, well, no, nothing Whittaker can do will stop him from getting smoked in 2 rounds or whatever. It will be the same. But nothing could have been further from the truth. Robert Whittaker fought that first fight ultra aggressively and ultra wildly. He was lunging face first after Adesanya on every attack and just feeding Adesanya these easy counter hooks while he was miles out of position. Lo and behold, second fight happens. Doesn't throw himself out of position almost at all, which is very rare for Bobby Knuckles because he's about 80%. I'd say he's about 70% technical striking, 30% just getting retarded with it. And this fight, he really cut that 30% down. But it resulted in a fight that was a slower pace, a less impactful fight. There were less hurting blows, and naturally people came out of that feeling as if they'd been let down or robbed. On the subject of robbed, there was also a lot of discussion of the scorecards. I have no problem with the scorecards. There was one that was 49-46, which I struggled with because it was, a closer fight than 4-1. But no, I have no problems with Izzy winning because I thought that he did more over the course of the fight. And the takedowns, while impressive, we are supposed to score what is done with them, which is very harsh on wrestlers because the process of getting someone to the mat is absolutely exhausting. So getting a takedown on someone good is a big achievement, but we are supposed to not score that. But it does mean that we get to, well, I suppose Maximov did win that fight the other weekend, but I was going to say it does mean that we get to discount a lot of what boring wrestle fuckers do. So the keys coming into this one, I was talking about Rob staying over his feet, because one of the things about Rob Whittaker is that he does close the distance exceptionally quickly, because I didn't even know that the reach disadvantage was so severe in this matchup. I knew that he was shorter and, shorter in height and shorter in reach, but 7 inches of reach plus, 3-4 inches of height? That's a lot, because those two things compound, because punching upwards shortens your own reach on your punches. So the fact that he was able to get to him a few times in the first fight I was watching and going, wow, that's surprising that he's actually making that much distance, but he's overdoing it so much because Adesanya was so good at backing up, getting offline, leaning his head away, and Whittaker would do his close, and then that last bit he'd be reaching for it and leaning out ahead of himself like Derek Brunson. Whereas when you watch Whittaker against Darren Till, Kelvin Gastelum, Jared Cannonier, guys who don't move nearly as well as Adesanya, and certainly don't retreat nearly as well as Adesanya, Whittaker moves in with his punches and he closes the distance with his feet very, very quickly, and he never really leans over himself doing it. Certainly he's never falling forward onto possible counterpunches. So in this one, he was actually a lot better doing that. And a lot of it was taking the stank off things. A lot of it, when he did land those jabs, they were good. You saw he made so much distance that he was going straight through Izzy's head and pushing it all the way back. But the low-line sidekick is a great example of him taking the stank off something, because in the first fight, he just had the 2 fights with Yoel Romero. Romero had kneecapped him in the first fight with that kick, the low-line sidekick. So in the second fight, the two of them just spent the entire fight loading up, jumping in with sidekicks with the knee coiled up to their chest and then stomping down. But he did that against Adesanya in the first fight, and Adesanya showed exactly the counter to low-line sidekicks, which is withdraw your leg and kick with the same leg. Amanda Nunes did it to Holly Holm. Because if the person is leaping in trying to put their whole weight through your knee, the moment you move that leg back, they're just going to fall into the spot where your leg was, and you can high kick them on the open side. So Whittaker was throwing himself miles out of position, and Adesanya was almost head kicking him in the first fight. Whereas in this one, Whittaker was just putting the foot on the knee, which is absolutely fine because you're trying to straighten the knee and jam them coming in. You don't need to invert their knee joint to have success with that kick. And you saw it work in this fight by him just poking away at that knee. And eventually, I think it was in the second or third round, when was it? But he poked the knee. Izzy tried to step in through it, and he ducked Izzy's return and got the clinch and got the first takedown. Just that little point scorer building into something bigger. And one of the things that I really like about Rob Whittaker's low-line sidekick is he will throw it, and we remarked on this after the Yoel Romero fight, he will throw the low-line sidekick across himself, which is very unusual in mixed martial arts. Typically, your low-line sidekick works when you and your opponent are in mirrored stances. So he's southpaw, you're orthodox, or you're southpaw and he's orthodox in an open stance matchup, because then your lead leg is directly in front of his lead leg. So you pick it up and slam it down. But Whittaker will throw it across himself so that if the opponent is orthodox and he's orthodox, he'll pick up his lead leg, his left leg, and he'll kick across himself into their lead leg with the side kick, which can turn your back a bit. So that's why people don't feel comfortable doing it. But he's had a lot of success doing it. And it meant that every time Adesanya switched stances, which is a major part of what throws people off about Adesanya's game, every time Adesanya switched stances, he could still sidekick the lead leg. He just had to spot the lead leg and go for it. Adesanya lower output than usual, I think because Whittaker was sort of waiting on him and then trying to do his long entries after Adesanya was moving in. Hence you saw a lot of really good intercepting jabs and lead hooks over the top after that. Some truly bizarre commentary on this card. I thought the prelims, they were fine. And then in the main event, it was just, here's my text from Joe Rogan inserting a narrative that doesn't exist. Which is bizarre. Just talking about this injured hand, and then immediately after the fight they ask Israel Adesanya about it. He's like, no, I do that in every fight. Have you never seen that? But Bisping was convinced, Bisping and DC were convinced that Israel Adesanya was killing Rob Whittaker. Which, if you watched it without the sound, or if you watched it with the sound and using your brain, you could go like, no, he isn't. But there were some really weird things said. I can't remember whether it was Bisping or DC, but one of them said Whittaker doesn't really throw straight punches. And you're going, his last 3 fights were won entirely with 1s and 2s. It was all he did against Darren Till and Jared Cannonier. Even before that, he fought, who was that Brazilian lad? But he's had a very good jab for a very long time and made great use of it. So that was a little surreal. But returning to the fight itself, the knockdown in the first I really liked. That was just an example of something Izzy's always doing, going right. And I think this is something that you have to appreciate about Israel Adesanya's style generally. I've written about it before, but any time a question mark kick comes off and he scores a big knockout, it's not because he's gone, I'm going to question mark kick this guy. It's because he's always doing it. He's always throwing out lots of volume, lots of feints, lots of setups. And when one sticks, that's when something really good happens. Whereas in MMA, I feel like there's a lot of, I'm going to run up and do a high kick now. Whereas for Israel Adesanya, he's always front kicking the body and he's always faking the front kick to the body and turning it over into the question mark kick or Brazilian kick, depending upon the pantheon level of your ignorance. Old school reference for you there. But this knockdown was just another example of Israel Adesanya doing something he always does, and it just catching a guy completely dead to rights. The rear hip feint. So when he brings he turns his hips as if he's going to throw his rear leg kick, and he slides his rear foot up underneath him. So we talk a lot about sneaking up the back foot, because your lunge, think of it like fencing. Lunging is dictated by where the back foot is. You reach as far as you can off the back foot, you drive into a long stance. And that idea is something that you will also see in point fighting competition. You sneak up the back foot so that you can lunge further than the opponent thought you could. You'll see it happen a lot, but people who get caught out by very long jabs, this is often one of the ways that they get snuck in. Because a lot of your expectation and your reads come from looking at where the guy's head and lead leg are from you. That's how you feel your distance, typically. and the back leg can be snuck up underneath the fighter without you realizing. So you think he can only thrust as far as he normally can with his jab, but suddenly he's got double the distance on it. Or his left straight, right straight, whatever he's doing. Lyoto Machida did a lot of this, faking with the hips and drawing his back foot up underneath him as he did it. But Izzy does it all the time. And he also does a thing where he will step his back foot up underneath him and then push off it and into a little galloping step, which is a great way to make distance to land a rear leg kick again. But he did the little galloping step, and instead he poked out a little left straight. He was southpaw, so he went fake left kick, hop up into a galloping step, and then a left straight. And Whittaker was, because he'd been kicked in the leg quite a bit already, he picked up his leg, was on one leg, and the left straight just shot down the centre, touched him on the chin. Wasn't a particularly hard punch, was the same sort of punch that Izzy's always throwing out, just caught him dead to rights. Fell for it hook, line and sinker. And he got sat down, got up quickly. You know, it wasn't one of those ones where the guy's whole world is turned upside down. It was just he got caught and fell and got up again. But Whittaker has done quite well fighting hurt in the past. The Romero fight is a great example. The second one, he gets chinned in that one, and he goes between clinching, pushing away, standing with his back to the fence and teeping on the one leg, putting his back foot to the fence and his hip against it and push kicking the guy as he comes in, ducking into clinches, elbowing. It's about 15 seconds where he's really hurt and he goes between every possible strategy or tactic to hide being hurt or survive while being hurt. But it's quite interesting because coming into this, a lot of people were sort of debating about Whittaker's chin. And chin is a really interesting idea because there are people who get dropped a lot, but it doesn't seem to affect them very much. So Dan Henderson is a great example. Dan Henderson, we remember for having one of the all-time great chins, but anyone who ever hit him, he'd stumble and drop to a knee, and then he'd hop up like nothing happened. He got dropped by like Carlos Newton of all people, but he used to end up falling over a lot. Vanderlei Silva's another one. Anyone who hit him, he'd fall to a knee, but he could recover so quickly. And then we're getting into the realms of the Rocky Balboa speech about how it's not about how hard you hit, it's about how hard you can get hit. And whatever he says in the rest of that speech. So what else was good? I really liked the jabs from Whittaker, as I said already. Oh, hammering the lead leg from Adesanya. That is a stylistic matchup thing. I said this in the boycast and the preview for the boycast, but I was just having a go about people being like, stylistically, Izzy just blows him out every time in the second round. There were so many dudes who were like, Izzy's going to blow him out. It's just the styles. No, that's not how that works. At this level, it's about how you fight. But there are things within the styles. Rob Whittaker was his typical way of fighting. His lead foot is often turned in, and that is something that makes you vulnerable to the outside low kick. So whenever Adesanya was orthodox, he'd throw his right leg and kick the calf or the thigh. And it's a two-way thing, because one is when your foot's turned in or you're slightly more side on and your foot's turned in, the kick is going into the back of the leg. So that means you've got a bigger movement to defend the kick than you would if your foot was facing forwards. You have to pick it up and turn it out so that the shin's pointing into the kick, when currently the kick is going into the back of the leg. So you're setting yourself up for a hard time there. Basically means that if you react at the same time you did from a stance where your foot was straight forward, you've picked your leg up, but it's still getting kicked in the back of the leg while it's in the air, and you end up stumbling. The second part of it is that if you get kicked and you don't react and you're kicked in the back of the leg, it's very easy to knock people's leg out in the direction of their toes. Think of an ankle pick or a foot sweep. The calf kick is basically an old school karate foot sweep. If you watched any of Elwin Hall, a point karate guy back in the 90s, he used to just punt people in the leg. So Izzy was getting on that leg early and often, and Whittaker was having a lot of trouble with it because even when he picked his leg up, he got caught in the back of the leg. Very hard to punish people from a toes internally rotated stance, because the shin is what punishes people, the prospect of kicking a shin. So then I suppose takedowns and grappling. Whittaker was able to get him down a couple of times, well, quite a few times actually throughout the fight, which was good, because we always say Rob Whittaker clearly loves his wrestling, because at one point he was going to represent Australia in the Commonwealth Games, I think it was, or the Yeah, was it the Commonwealth Games or maybe the World Championship? But he won his way through into the Australian team. But it was also the same time that he was getting injured all the time, and the UFC said, please don't. But he's been very keen on working his wrestling and got it to a respectable level. Yet he never really used it offensively in his fights. So there were hints of it against Till and Gastelum and Cannonier, but not an awful lot. And you were thinking he's going to have to use it against Israel Adesanya. And he actually did quite well. We talked about the first one, the sidekick, duck into the clinch, got the takedown off it. There was a beautiful one in round 5, I think it was, the one where he really just got Izzy dead to rights with it, where he forced an exchange. We talked about this on the broadcast, but if he was going to get a takedown out in the open, he needed to force exchanges and get Izzy swinging at him, and get Izzy forgetting about the fact that he wants to drop on the hips. So he managed to hit a double leg, and he managed to stand up and throw his head back in a way so that he could get up almost behind Izzy. It was very impressive. And Israel Adesanya looked great along the fence. We talked about this, but he uses the fence very well to prop himself up and to build up. Where this was... Didn't see... Well, there was some double jabbing in this fight, but it wasn't really used to get Izzy to the fence and capitalise there. This was more of a point fighty out in the open sort of contest. But we talked about how Marvin Vettori was completely correct in using the double jab to get Israel backing up towards the fence, but then used it to do really stupid things. Well, one really stupid thing over and over, which was dropping on the hips and trying to take him down with a double leg, where when you're on the double leg along the fence, you can't attack him in any way. If you're on an upper body clinch, at least you can knee him a bit. 2, he's propping himself up on the fence. 3, if you finish a double leg on the fence, he's just sitting on the fence and ready to jump up again. So it was a really bad tactic or strategy generally from Vettori, but the double jab was working nicely. So in this one, Izzy was able to prop himself up on the fence. Lots of work from that back body lock. What was the fight I called 2020 meta in a nutshell? I think it was Neil Magny versus Anthony Rocco. Fuck, what's his second name? Martin? Yeah, it was. Oh, wow, I got that in one. But yes, both of those guys would get in on a clinch or a takedown attempt, push to the fence, and the other guy would throw his arm over, turn his back, and break the hands and get away. And it was just the 2020 meta in a nutshell. But you saw Rob trying to hide his hands in one of Izzy's hip pockets, switching from side to side. Izzy would try and get them in front of him, turn his hip forward, break him off on this hip. The old Sakuraba technique. A couple of moments, Rob hopped on his back. Some of the people who were talking about scoring this fight for Whittaker were saying threatening a submission. Wasn't really threatening a submission. If you saw, there were a couple of times where Izzy hit the mat out in the open and he immediately turned to hands and knees and quad podded, and Whittaker would be jumping up on his back, and then Whittaker would let go, and people would go like, why did he let go? He was on his back. Because he was quad podding and Whittaker had one arm over the shoulder. If you do that, you can fall off and end up on the bottom. And I don't think Adesanya is the kind of guy who's going to give up free top position just because he loves striking. He'll probably hold you there for a little bit, and you've lost that round. So there were a couple of occasions like that where Rob got on his back almost, or was to all appearances on his back, but then hopped off. Back's a complex position, man, because even if you're in really dominant back control and the guy puts his back to the mat with you on it, think Tim Sylvia, Randy Couture, or some other fight if you're not fucking ancient like me. But when you're both looking up at the ceiling with one guy on the bottom, on the back, he's supposedly in the dominant position, but you can't strike from there effectively. You can maybe do the John Tuck / BJ Penn heel strike into the solar plexus, which we do like, but you don't have gravity on your side in the way that you do in almost every other dominant position. And if the guy can tie up your hands, you've just wasted time doing nothing. So overall, good fight, enjoyable fight. I think a third one would be compelling. I'm sure a lot of people are now in the mindset that they don't want to see a third fight, but I think it would be compelling. I think it's interesting because Rob's now in the position where he's going to kill off contenders. They want to do Cannonier next, I think, because obviously he's just had a good performance on the same card as the champion, which is a great way to build people up. Never understood why they were so reluctant to do it with everything else. They very rarely did a Conor McGregor fights on card with very obvious next Conor McGregor opponent or anything like that. It was very strange that they never really went for it. The one example I can think of that was really good was I think it was Conor Conor versus Khabib. On the main card, you had Tony versus Anthony Pettis, which gave people something to immediately be hyped for. The prospect of Tony versus Khabib. And then we booked it too many times and it caused a global pandemic, and then that all went tits up. But Cannonier has put himself in a good position because of this. Sorry, we'll finish up with the Adesanya Whittaker stuff, then we'll move on to Cannonier. But I thought it was a good fight. I thought Rob showed that it was his approach in the first fight that made him look so bad. It's kind of like the Demetrius Johnson-Henry Cejudo fight. I'm going to break kayfabe here. I was watching people on Sherdog get super mad about my Musashi bit. And it's like, do I tell him? Do I tell him that it's kayfabe? But then that ruins the fun. But Henry Cejudo versus Demetrius Johnson. However you look at that second fight, a lot of people think that Demetrius Johnson deserved the win on the scorecards. A lot of people think that Henry Cejudo deserved the win. But however you look at it, the improvement from getting smoked by Johnson in one round or two? However quickly in the first fight, and looking really one-note, one-dimensional, not particularly skillful in that performance, to taking him to a razor-thin decision is enormous. And I think you could say that the improvement in Rob between these fights has been substantial, or certainly in his approach has been substantial, regardless of whether you think that he lost it or was robbed on the scorecards or whatever. There's stuff to commend here. And I thought Israel Adesanya looked good as always, and very encouraging that he's still so difficult to hold down even when he's caught dead to rights with good takedown attempts or good takedown completions. So on the subject of good takedown attempts and good takedown completions, let's talk about Tai Tuivasa versus Derek Lewis. I mean, this fight was pretty fun, actually, for what it was. Tai Tuivasa, you saw him come out and he was going to do the Mark Hunt game plan. He was shoulder feinting Derek Lewis back, showing him the jab, showing him the shoulder, and then he was hammering the right leg with low... Sorry, he was hammering in his right leg to the lead leg of Lewis with low kicks. And that's anti-Derek Lewis 101, because all he can do is back up to the fence every time you feint him, because he doesn't want to counter every time, because doesn't have the energy to counter every time. So he starts backing up to the fence, gets very scared. You kick his leg. He's standing lock-legged and takes them in just the ugliest way possible. Every kick that Derek Lewis takes looks like he wants to give up the moment he takes it. So that's how Tuivasa started out. That's what his corner were calling for. And there was a lovely moment in the very beginning of the fight where he feinted the low kick. So he squared his hips as if to low kick. Lewis swung on him, and Tuivasa ducked into a clinch and pushed him to the fence, which is another great thing to do against Lewis. I thought clinch fighting might have been very interesting for Tuivasa here, because he does have good elbows, and he does do the Mark Hunt thing of getting his hands under the chin, pushing the opponent's head away and breaking free that way. The Mark Hunt movement saved his career, basically. And Tuivasa's been doing that since his first fight in the UFC. But then Derek Lewis tricked him. He used his awesome inside trip. This is something we talked about before. I think I talked about it before the Garn fight, maybe? But I've talked about it several times before. Derek Lewis has a really good inside trip. And I, at some point, watched, I think it was his fight with Rulon Potts, who is a scrub, but has multiple black belts in multiple disciplines. And in that fight, he hits a beautiful inside trip on Rulon Potts and smashes him on the ground. But one of the commentators says he has a black belt in judo. And I must have thought they meant Derek Lewis, when in fact they meant Rulon Potts. So sorry for at one point saying Derek Lewis is a black belt in judo. He does not. He just has a very nice inside trip. And he did used to ground and pound people a lot more. But if you watched him against Dorcas last time, he backed Dorcas onto the fence and hit the clinch and hit the inside trip almost immediately, had Dorcas stumbling and then started swinging on him again. It's a really good move for him, because if he ends up in top of closed guard, he can start hammering people. He took Tuivasa down with the inside trip. Tuivasa started working up, building up along the fence, and Lewis just went ham, hitting him in the face. So Tuivasa has a hell of a chin on him. And then they got to round two, and Tuivasa's corner were going, stop doing that. Do the things we practiced. Do the Mark Hunt game plan. And he gets chinned again in round two. Lewis starts opening up and swinging on him, and Tuivasa punches back. Lewis only throws like wide loopy shots, so he got caught up the middle, backed off as if to say, "Ooh, I didn't like that." And Tuivasa moves in, hits him with a right elbow, starches him face down. incredible knockout. Does a shoey. We can forgive him. It was a good performance. Yeah, I really enjoyed this. And the funny thing is, ahead of this, we were talking about how both men lost to the ghost of Junior Dos Santos after he'd been beaten, smeared across the mat by Cain Velasquez in two 25-minute fights and had very little left in the tank. And both these guys were matched up against him, supposed to put him out to pasture and get a good win on their record. And both of them lost at almost exactly the 6-minute, 7-minute mark, because that's when heavyweights fall apart. They go, oh, you were supposed to fall down by now, and I didn't do any treadmill work coming into this. And then I just looked at the round time to finish this fight, 1:40 into the second round. Oh, perfect. Mwah. But respect to Tuivasa, because he's given us a blissful couple of months before Derek Lewis builds up the longest win streak in the heavyweight division again, because it's bum weight. So the other important fight on this one was Cannonier versus Brunson, middleweight division. Generally not great, but fun little matchup here. And in the pre-fight stuff on the Boycast, I was talking about how Brunson should be hammering in the left high kick and then going between the left straight and the level change. Because if you hammer the left high kick, stands the guy up, then you drop on his hips. And he was doing that quite well for the early going. He was also catching Cannonier quite a lot with his left straight, because he throws his left straight leading completely bent over at the waist. His head is about 3 feet forward of his hips, which is fucking terrible boxing technique. It's fucking terrible technique in any combat sport. But it does mean that his left straight is about half a foot longer than it should be. So Cannonier kept getting blasted by this left straight, which was the ugliest thing you've ever seen in the cage. And looking around as if to say, which one of your motherfuckers hit me? Rush Hour reference. Oh, don't get me into Jackie Chan. I'll start talking about Sifu again. I spent most of the Boycast reviewing Sifu. I'm on the last boss, but I'm about 70 years old, so I have no leeway. I can't die. Anyway, Cannonier was doing a good job of stopping the takedowns, because Brunson every time was throwing this left straight, bent over at the waist, and then he was already reaching down to pick up the leg. I suppose that's an advantage of leaning in like that. Chris Weidman, very good at picking up snatch singles like that. If you watch him ragdoll regional champion Gegard Mousasi, that is how he does it. But Cannonier looked really good on the mat, using butterfly hooks to get up. And as the fight progressed, he kept doing it more and more. Brunson got very, very tired. Hit him with a beautiful elbow in the clinch. Then a right hook into a back fist off the same hand. The old tattoo. A couple of them on this card. Sent Brunson reeling, got down on top of him half guard and elbowed him to death. It was a very nice stoppage. It was a very impressive performance from Jared Cannonier. Sad for blonde Brunson, but equally, this division fucking sucks. At least it's someone new for Israel Adesanya to fight. Right, what else is on this card? We can just do things I enjoy now. That's good. Moicano versus Hernandez. Not an awful lot happened in that one, I don't think. It went 2 rounds and they were working the whole time, but I just didn't take an awful lot away from it. There was a lovely right uppercut that Moicano found and then used again to win the fight. He used it as a slip counter to the jab. He slipped to the outside of the jab, came back with the right uppercut left hook, which is it's a standard combination. You'll see it all the time, but when it lands, it's lovely. And he just caught Hernandez lingering. Hernandez was throwing out jabs and sort of pushing away off them as well, using them as a frame, which is good. Framing off people is great, but if you miss and the guy is there underneath your armpit hitting you, that's the danger of it. And then the ending came as they sort of ended up in sort of a loose half clinchy thing, and Moicano went to the uppercut again, caught him, knocked him down, got the rear naked choke. Bobby Green versus Nasrat Haqparast. Here we go. Bobby Green, the man of the pandemic. The stats after this they released, apparently Bobby Green now has the most strikes landed at lightweight over a career with 1,400. But this is the thing. Until very recently, Bobby Green's whole thing has been not doing enough, rolling off punches and not countering. So I don't know, did he just do this in the last 3 or 4, most of the work? I made a little political compass template thing for volume from low output to calm down, lad, and straight. The other axis was straight hitting to spastic flailing. And Bobby Green was bottom left corner, low output, straight hitting. And now he's up in the middle output and straight hitting. Whereas Kyler Phillips is top right, spastic flailing and calm down lad. But this fight was this is just the fight to show people, to explain to them the basic principles of all striking, which is straight, as Joe Gans said, straight punches get boxers plums. A phrase which still makes no sense at all. When you say straight punches get boxers plums, I think of dropping into the splits and punching the balls like Johnny Cage. But the meaning is straight hitting is the key, because straight hitting gives you this is like the meathead getting on stage and writing that force equals mass times acceleration, or whatever it is, with no further explanation. But the golden rule in martial arts generally is that a straight line is or a straight path is faster than a curved path. Straight blows get there quicker. If someone's trying to throw looping blows at you and you're jabbing them, yours is probably going to get there first if they don't move their head. And that's where things get complex, because if a guy can move his head and come back with circular or looping blows, or time looping blows over the top of straight blows, that's equally legit. But Nasrat Haqparast's striking style was completely made for Bobby Green, because Bobby Green loves shoulder rolling, and Nasrat Haqparast is Bobby Green is a southpaw who loves shoulder rolling. Does switch from time to time, but Nasrat Haqparast is also a southpaw, and his main weapon is the overhand left, thrown almost straight armed, which is the perfect punch to shoulder roll as a southpaw. So that was the entirety of Nasrat Haqparast's output in this fight, and he couldn't land it once because Bobby Green just kept shoulder rolling it, or getting away from it, or shooting inside it with straight punches, and then everything Bobby Green threw was straight. It was gorgeous. You can win a fight with 1-2s and 2-1s. 2-1s are equally legit. There are things about leading with the right hand that are seen as less advantageous than leading with a jab, but throwing 2-1s is a nice way to keep straight hitting and mix up what you're doing. So Bobby Green throughout this fight is throwing 1-2s and 2-1s, or 1-2-1s and 2-1-2s. And then he's throwing front kicks with his lead leg and his rear leg. Not so much his rear leg, because that is, again, not quite straight line. It's a little bit longer technique. So he's throwing lots of lead leg push kicks and snap kicks to the gut, and then coming down with 1-2s. Lovely stuff to see, stuff that everyone should be doing in the gym all the time. He's going to the body with body jabs. There was a beautiful replay in going into round 2, I think it was. He goes body jab, and Haqparast goes high forearms guard, because that was his answer to everything. He goes body jab, so he's close enough now to look at where his eyes are and see where the opening is, and he just slips the 1-2 straight through the middle of Haqparast's guard immediately after. Used the body jab to get in, have him clenching up, showing the guard so that he can just line everything up on the second and third blow. Beautiful stuff. In fact, basically the only times that Bobby Green didn't land were when he was throwing like a left hook or a right uppercut in there as well. Everything that he threw straight just couldn't miss. Truly awesome performance from Bobby Green. I think it's quite interesting, because I was reading some of the reactions to this, and obviously everyone was very hype on it. Bobby Green it's nice to feel good for him, because what I've seen dozens of his fights now. And it used to be things like he'd fight, Josh Thompson was the one back in the day, where he just rolled off all Josh Thompson's offense and then did fucking nothing in response. And it was infuriating, because you're going, this guy clearly has talent, but he's not doing anything. And for years it has been that he's not doing enough. So he'd have good fights with people like Lando Venata, but just drop it on the scorecards, or just get the draw, or something like that. And through the pandemic, he fought something like 5-6 times already. He got Iaquinta in his last one, who is kind of on the downward slope. Hadn't fought in a while as well, because he's Iaquinta, he doesn't fight often. And Bobby Green finally got a knockout, so I'm hoping that helped his confidence. But he's been bringing the rate of activity up. He fought Rafael Fiziev, who everyone considered unbeatable in the striking, and he did absolutely fine. In the third round, I think he took the third round. He was quite dominant in the third round, because Fiziev slowed down. I had to watch that fight again, but I remember it being a good, compelling, competitive fight, which was really weird, because it was such a matchup of power kicker versus guy who only really throws straight punches, and Green did it amazingly. So I was watching some of the reactions to this fight, and people were saying, well, what's Bobby's ceiling realistically, because he's not going to get into the top 10. And you're going, well, he was slight adjustments away from beating Fiziev, who is, I believe, in the top 15 going into the top 10. But I suppose Bobby Green gets a ranked opponent now, which would be great. There's a fight going on, is it this weekend, between Joel Alvarez and Arman Sarukian, which is an absolutely killer fight. And winner of that would be an interesting fight for him. Actually, loser of that would be an interesting fight for him. They're both very well regarded fighters in that division. I don't think he even wrestled, because that's been Bobby Green's thing. He throws 1-2s and he hits short takedowns. Anyway, what else was good on this card? I skipped Arlovski because I'm never watching another Arlovski fight. It's been 19 fights since he knocked anyone out. He's not the guy he's not the same fighter he used to be. And every time he fights and gets a split decision over a shit heavyweight, it reminds you how shit heavyweight is. Haven't watched Casey O'Neill versus Roxanne Modafferi yet, but I will. Might talk about that on the boycast. Kyler Phillips versus Marcelo Rojo. We talked about this being a tune-up because Marcelo Rojo has been stopped a couple of times lately. Kyler Phillips he lost to Roy Van Piver. Not through Roy Van Piver being great, but because Kyler Phillips fights in an especially silly way. And in this one, he did exactly the same thing. He came out, he's throwing right hand. He's leading combinations with the right hands and leaping left hooks. Never a jab in sight. Spinning kicks all the way. It's very cool, but it's probably not going to take him into like the top 10 of the division. Very nice finish, though, with the triangle armbar. Always love seeing a triangle from mount, actually. It's one of my favourites because it's just the best spot in the world to elbow from. Allberg versus Charant was shit. Ronnie Lawrence versus Mana Martinez. The bantamweight fights on this card were absolutely banging. Ronnie Lawrence versus Mana Martinez is really fun. Lawrence was looking to wrestle for much of the fight. His striking was very... I want to say point fighting again. This is the second time I've referenced point fighting on this episode even, but that's sort of like weird point karate stuff where you throw a rear-handed straight and then you step through and throw another rear-handed straight off the other stance. That like running reverse punch style. And he knocked Martinez down twice with that. That sort of opening myself up but running to make distance sort of striking. The takedowns were lovely. Martinez... One of the things that the commentators were criticising, which I think is probably correct, is his trying to strike from positions where you're never going to get any power on strikes. Off his back, on one knee, coming up along the fence. Granted that those strikes are to make the opponent do something. Maybe not block the strike, but move so that you have an opening to improve your position. But I think most guys by now should have worked out that there are strikes that you can annoy people with much better than trying to punch him. Using your gloved fist to try and hit someone over a very short space. The glove is only going to act as a pillow. It's not going to let you hurt him. Shinya Aoki, and don't look to Shinya Aoki for a lot of striking technique, but Shinya Aoki hit on it correctly. Whenever he was in top position or bottom position and he was trying to make something happen and he couldn't with just strength and grappling alone, he would open his hand up and slap the ear. The thing that they always tell you will burst the eardrum if you're not... Or, as we call it in the UK, tangoed. You know when you've been tangoed. There was a whole ad campaign where dudes would... I think he'd sip from a bottle of Tango, which is a drink, a fizzy drink, and an orange guy would slap him over both ears and it'd say, you know when you've been tangoed. And then there was an epidemic of kids slapping each other over the ears and apparently bursting each other's eardrums. But if you want to make movement on the ground, slap the ears. Igor Vovchanchin was doing it back in the day too. It's a level below gouging the eye, but gouging the eye is illegal. It's about the most reaction you can get out of the least movement. Or getting your hand underneath the is it your septum, the bit in the middle of the nose? Get your hand underneath there and push. That's another one that just causes enormous reactions from a very small movement. And in fact, Martinez was complaining on the bottom. I think he was complaining about Lawrence pushing a thumb into his xiphoid process or whatever. When you see guys doing the hand choke or the rape choke, as we used to call it back in the day, apparently it's legal to push in and push the web of your hand into the opponent's throat. You're not allowed to put your fingers around their trachea, but that's a very different move. You would see the guy's fingers come in from being spread on the neck to literally just the windpipe. But the other one is you're not allowed to put your fingers or hand or whatever down into the xiphoid process at the top of your sternum where there's a little hole in your neck. If you push down into that really pisses people off. Bas Rutten did it to Kevin Randleman a load because it wasn't illegal back then. But he did it from the bottom and made movement happen. But in the third round of this fight, Martinez actually makes something happen. It's pretty cool. this links in with the other bantamweight fight of the night, but the left hook to the body to the right straight upstairs is a money combination. But if it's all you do, people do see it coming. But Martinez did it perfectly because every time he got Lawrence towards the fence, his corner said body first, because as we talked about in the pre-fight to Whittaker versus Adesanya, and anytime you're fighting someone who moves well, if you try and swing at someone's head along the fence and they duck, they're out, they're free, they've got away, you've lost every advantage that you had from getting them to the fence. So swing to the body first, and Sandy Sadler versus Willie Pepper is a great example, but if you hit the body first and then you hit him in the head afterwards in the same combination, that's great. So that's what he did. Roddy Lawrence is circling around towards Martinez's left side on the fence. Martinez hits him with the left hook to the body and a right straight upstairs, stuns him, and then Lawrence starts circling past his lead foot again, and Martinez spins into the back fist. Perfect placement, knocked him down. Unfortunately, couldn't get the finish because that would have just been wild. He'd been getting dominated up to that point, and then he just turned it around. But very hard to do late in a fight, especially when you're already tired. But a great fight. If you've not seen that one of probably the two best fights from the weekend. And the other one was the other bantamweight fight between Douglas Silva de Andrade and Sergey Morozov. De Andrade I always call deprived class in Dark Souls. He was actually less shredded this time, but normally he looks like he's got about 3% body fat. And he used to have this weird rat tail haircut as well. But Morozov came out and beat the brakes off Andrade. He was striking really well. He's throwing long jabs and straights, step up knee to the body, and then he knocked him down with that weird sort of Russian uppercut. I mean, he's Kazakh, but we'll call it Eastern Bloc uppercut. They love throwing long right uppercuts with the fist, so the thumb is pointing back towards them, as opposed to the thumb pointing off to the side, as you would with a normal uppercut. They love doing that, and they also love slipping inside jabs and doing that too. And by they, I mean everyone in one half of the world. But generally, it's a massive generalization, as whenever you talk about like national styles in boxing. But it is very prevalent on the Russian MMA scene that you see these long, firstly leading with the right uppercut, but long right uppercuts with the thumb pointing back towards the fighter. So vertical fist uppercut, particularly thrown with an inside slip. So slip inside the jab and throw the uppercut underneath. So he knocks him down with that, ends up in Douglas de Andrade's closed guard on the fence, smashes in some elbows, opens up a gnarly cut. Blood pouring down Andrade. He starts building up on the fence. Blood is waterfalling down on his own thigh. And the crowd are audibly disgusted. On the way up, he gets hit by a knee in the face as well. Then second round comes out. He'd been looking for the left hook to the body, to the right straight to the head throughout the entire first round. He'd been doing it a couple of times, and he wasn't moving his head either, so he's just going in for it, exposing himself completely as he does it. But he did it in the second round. He managed to land it on Morozov and then and hurt him. And then he did it again later, and Morozov was trying to jab him as he was coming in, showing his face, and missed, and got left hook to the body, right straight upstairs again. Then de Andrade dropped him to his knees, and it was clear that Morozov was getting very tired, because like the way he missed the jab as de Andrade came in and just sort of lingered while de Andrade dropped him, it was very obvious he'd used up what energy he had. But de Andrade gets behind him, grabs the seatbelt, and just sort of yanks him back into back control, and then starts trying to choke him with the wrong hand, so that Morozov is basically being pushed into an escape. But finally he locks the body triangle. Morozov switches sides to try and put pressure on the body triangle, which nowadays we tend to think of like as a fairly crap way to escape the body triangle, because you're putting pressure on the guy's foot, but you're not unlocking the legs. You're asking him to unlock the legs, and if you trap the legs, then he can't unlock the legs, and he's not going to tap to that kind of like straight ankle lock. No one does. So basically you've trapped yourself in the body triangle. But he goes to the other side, and as he does, Andrade grabs the neck with the other hand and chokes him and gets it right. But a wild fight. You've absolutely got to watch this one. De Andrade has had a couple of good ones and good finishes in a row now, and he tends to have quite entertaining fights. Had a good little scrap with Petr Yan back in the day. Because as this fight would tell you, but that fight with Yan especially tells you, he is tough as nails. He takes a licking and keeps on ticking. Or at least makes you earn your money getting him out of there. Are we just down to bad fights now? I think we are. Maxim Grishin versus William Knight, where William Knight didn't make weight. The fun part of this one was Michael Bisping being disgusted that someone wouldn't make weight, and Daniel Cormier going out, like, bending over backwards to make excuses for not making weight. Having very famously cheated on the scale to make weight in a title fight. Do you remember when Khabib did that and it just wasn't commented on at all? But the fight was crap. Maxime Grisham just put in work. William Knight just kept leaning back and looking for check hooks against a guy who was very long and only really kicking. So, I mean, William Knight looked crap against Charant. It just so happened that Charant overreached himself and walked onto the check hook. But if you're very, very short and stocky for the weight class and your game is to lean back and try and hook people coming in, there's sort of a disconnect there between attributes and method. Oh, and then Jeremiah Wells versus Blood Diamond. This was interesting because on the Boycast, I was looking at this going, I can't quite wrap my head around this fight because Jeremiah Wells is 9-2, has fought in the UFC a couple of times, just finished Wally Alves. He was booked against Jake Matthews and against Tim Means, who are both hard fights. And then he ended up against the 3-0 opponent. And I said whatever the opponent's name was. But in the since then, his Tapology page has changed and his opponent's name is now Blood Diamond officially. So I had heard about Blood Diamond because Israel Adesanya hypes him at every possible opportunity. But man, this is like that guy who was Nick Diaz's mate. So he turned up on the same card as him when he fought Robbie Lawler and just got smashed by an actual world-class fighter. It was dreadful. But Blood Diamond came out, and well, this was weird. Jeremiah Wells tried to do a lap at the cage and tripped and stumbled. Like, I think Stephan Bonner did this against Anderson Silva. But as he tripped and stumbled, Blood Diamond ran in and clinched him, which was probably not the best idea for the guy who was supposed to be the elite striker, because Wells just turned him onto the fence and then took him down, easily got on his back. And it took him a while, but he got the choke before the end of the first round. And he didn't really throw any strikes in doing it either. So a bit of a harsh start for Blood Diamond in the UFC. But again, like, being a 3-0 fighter and taking on someone who is a very experienced veteran in the UFC is biting off a lot. Anyway, that's all the fights from the weekend. They were all right. We got some interesting ones coming up this... Well, I say we got interesting ones coming up this weekend. We got a Johnny Walker main event because Fiziev versus RDA is off or was moved back a couple of weeks because of an injury or something. And that's competing with Bellator's Logan Storley main event. And if you watched Logan Storley's last one, not great. But we'll find stuff to talk about on the Boycast, that and also my gaming habits and shit like that. And then we got Dariush versus Islam and fun stuff coming up. Plus I got Advanced Striking 2.0 Alexander Volkanovski article coming out soon. And my 30 Years War History episode coming out soon, so look forward to those. If you want to get in on the extra episodes and articles, sign up to the Patreon. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Henry Hooft slagging off his own fighters, bless.